For 9 seasons, Seinfeld brought us some of the funniest moments in TV history. And now we're uncovering secrets from the groundbreaking sitcom.
We wanted to do a show that kind of addressed what people were leaving out of the other shows.
I thought, well, if they don't do this show, I'm going to quit.
Thanks to Seinfeld, you've heard people say yada, yada, yada.
And yada, yada, yada. That's how I talk to people sometimes.
I think it's actually kind of amusing.
And you know what being master of your domain is all about.
Who don't you put the bomb on?
Now get ready to find out what you didn't know about the Emmy-winning series.
Also for you.
From the origin of the show's biggest episodes.
I just happened to hear on the radio that the manufacturer of the sponge was going out of business.
To the secret behind its success.
Jerry, hello!
That was obviously the key to the show.
25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld starts right now.
Come back 1 year.
Number 25. The show title experienced shrinkage. Before Seinfeld's pilot debuted as the Seinfeld Chronicles, it was being pitched as stand-up.
It was supposed to be Seinfeld's stand-up interspersed with vignettes from his life. And it was submitted to the network by Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David as stand-up for that reason.
The title changed to the Seinfeld Chronicles for its first episode, and then shrunk to its now famous name.
I think there was a show on at the time called The Marshall Chronicles. So 2 Chronicles may have been one too many Chronicles.
It was the Seinfeld Chronicles, so they just cut it down to Seinfeld.
Number 24. Kramer was the master of his scenes.
Obviously, Kramer is this zany, crazy character, but from what people have said about Michael Richards in real life, he was a good deal more subdued.
Michael's very intense and very focused, and he would work on bits for hours and hours.
He's probably one of the most intense actors I've ever seen in my life. He's not the wild man that Kramer is.
Yeah. Ah. Why doesn't he just move in here?
But what he looks like and how he acts betrays that, and I think that's the key to his comedy, that he's so smart.
When he's backstage, he's going over his dialogue, he's going over his lines, he wants to make sure that everything is right. He's just very intense about what he's doing. And then he comes out in Kramer, and it all just kind of explodes.
Kramer couldn't just open a door. He had to thrust it open and plunge like a panther about to pounce.
Those aren't improv entrances. He's working on that all week long. He's making sure that the right foot slips. He's making sure that the correct shoulder hits the door. He's making sure that he shakes his head and does all that on the right beat.
Every single one of them was just a little different, and he worked them. He would work on them. He was so focused on that character.
What makes someone really good as a comic actor is that they're totally unique. There's no one else that could have done the Kramer character. No one else. And he made it all his own in that way.
Number 23. Jerry was a real stand-up guy. Fans will always remember Jerry Seinfeld from all the hours of FaceTime he got as the main star. But it's his hard work and generosity behind the scenes that will never be forgotten by his coworkers.
Jerry is one of the smartest, fastest, brightest people I have ever encountered. He's generous, and he's funny, and he's kind, which is very unusual for a comedian.
Jerry and Larry were joined at the hip, and that when they had originally auditioned the show and the network tried to get it away from Larry, Jerry said, "Larry comes with me."
One of the nicest guys I've ever worked with, ever. And I've been acting since 1832, you know. He'd come around in the morning when you have the table reading. He'd go around the entire table, introduce himself to the new people, and welcome them to the show, and thank them for being on it. Nobody does that. I've never seen that before.
I was everywhere. I was on the stage, I was in the editing room, I was in the writing room, so I knew what the problems were on stage to tell the writers. I knew what the writers were thinking to tell the actors. And I knew what the whole intention was when we were in editing. And I lived there. I lived in that apartment and in those rooms.
Guest actor Lawrence Manderly will never forget how Jerry went out of his way to shoot one of his scenes.
When the actual episode was being shot, I was not in town. I was out on a cruise in the Caribbean somewhere. My agent at the time did not book me out. I called, I reported myself out.
Because of this misunderstanding, the Seinfeld staff pushed his scene back a week.
When I came in, everybody, particularly Jerry, was really concerned about where I was and how I had been. And he told me, listen, I'm just glad that you're okay. They could have rewritten it. They could have just gone their merry way. He did not have to do that at all. He didn't have to bring me back in. He didn't have to be concerned, but he did both. And as far as I'm concerned, Jerry Seinfeld is all right with
me. Number 22. Elaine almost wasn't sponge-worthy.
A lot of people don't know that Elaine was not in the original pilot episode of Seinfeld.
It's hard to imagine Seinfeld without Elaine. But when the pilot aired in 1989, it was George, Jerry, Kramer, and Claire, the waitress.
The female comic foil of these guys was initially this wisecracking waitress at the diner portrayed by Lee Garlington.
What the network told Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld was they needed a female character to bounce off of. So what they decided to do was to create Elaine.
I knew Julia from Saturday Night Live. I wrote there for one season and she was on the show. And I remembered how incredible she was. And so when we were looking for Elaine, I think we had to audition some people. And then I suggested Julia. She came in and met Jerry, and he loved her immediately.
It turns out that Julia Louis-Dreyfus didn't even know that she wasn't in the pilot until years later when the DVD release came out and there was the pilot without Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
I think it's actually kind of amusing.
Number 21. George Costanza was a real character.
George was actually based on Larry David, the co-creator of the show.
I'm not asking someone. We are going to figure this out.
Bald-headed, negative, insecure George Costanza seemed like he was in a league of his own. But actually, he wasn't.
George was definitely based on Larry. Just like Larry in Curb Your Enthusiasm is based on Larry.
So disrespectful.
It's Larry without any inner censor in his head at all.
I hope my breath is okay.
Larry has a compulsion to do the least appropriate thing. And that's what George is all about.
They thought I was handicapped long before I misrepresented myself as handicapped.
It's shocking that Larry David would have himself portrayed in the nastiest, most selfish, vile way possible. But that's also his creative genius, that he would put his ego on the shelf and just say, all right, let's make this character so miserable, such a low slug, that you have to laugh at him.
He was just so evil in a neurotic, silly way, and it was just a very well-written character.
Number 20. The ultimate New York show wasn't in New York.
We shot in California at CBS Radford, which is in the San Fernando Valley.
They shot everything on a set. Even Jerry's apartment was actually a Los Angeles location.
And we'd go outside and we would shoot on New York Street on the Radford lot, and sometimes we'd go over to the Paramount lot and shoot on their New York Street.
I lived in New York for a long time. Nothing could be more unlike New York.
Seinfeld did use some real New York City exteriors, like Tom's Restaurant, which posed as the facade for Monk's Cafe.
It was like a little visit to New York every week, working on that show.
People thought it was New York. It was constantly coming up to me. How do you like going to New York and back? And we didn't go. What do you mean you didn't go?
Number 19. The show about nothing was about something.
Everybody likes to say it's the show about nothing, which is, you know, it's funny because that was a line from the show. Obviously, everything has to be about something. And so the show was really, to me, about everything.
My father has never thrown anything out, ever. My father wears his sneakers in the pool.
We wanted to do a show that kind of addressed what people were leaving out of the other shows that is in life. You know, all of the little struggles of life.
In the beginning, a lot of my stories were based on things that happened, but then you start getting into this mindset of, hey, what if this happened? You know, you start making it up more.
It's always a combination of ideas that are somewhat loosely based on something that you experienced or something you just come up with out of the clear blue sky.
The sponge, I just happened to hear on the radio that the manufacturer of the sponge was going out of business, and so immediately I was thinking, wow, if Elaine's a sponge user, maybe she would have to hoard them. I was, you know, always looking for the really tiny little slice of life stories.
Somehow we hit upon the idea of turning those small things into huge disasters. And that's what the show was about, that the small struggles of life are the big struggles.
Later in the show,
This is my own shirt, which I'm very proud of.
we'll reveal the truth behind the guy who claims to be the real Kramer. But first,
The first time Newman was in the show, you never saw him.
find out why Larry David was so vocal over Jerry's nemesis, Newman, when 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld returns. Welcome back to 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld. Number 18. Seinfeld got served by Johnny Cochran.
Oh, man, who told you to put the bomb on? I didn't tell you to put the bomb on, and the maestro wasn't even there.
When actor Phil Morris took on the role of the Johnny Cochran-inspired character Jackie Childs, he became a big hit with fans and Cochran himself. Well, at least for a little while.
So I'm doing the character and getting laughs, and the show's rating #1. Every episode I did, #1, funny stuff. And he was like, great. I'd see him at the barbershop, and he was in the barber chair, leaned back with the towel wrapped around his face. He'd just gotten a shave. They took the towel off his face. He saw it was me, and he just started laughing and gives me a huge hug. And he says, man, you're mad talented. You're hilarious. Well, that was after the first episode. Then I did 3 and 4. Then I did some commercials for Honda. Then I did some commercials for Diet Dr. Pepper. And I got a letter from his law office literally telling me to cease and desist. But I just disregarded it. You know, he'd already signed off. It was too late, baby.
But did you know that before Phil took Jackie Childs to the next level, the Seinfeld staff considered using Johnny Cochran himself?
I knew that in the beginning there was some thought to having Johnny Cochran play the part himself. And he was kind of open to it, and then we realized we kind of need an actor. At the time, you know, the O.J. verdict was so fresh in everybody's mind, we were like wondering, like, maybe this would be really way too distracting. So we had Phil Morris play it, and he was just incredible. He'd put on that fake mustache, and he'd be in the character in like a second.
Who told you to put the bomb on?
Phil had to beat out several big names before donning the Jackie Childs mustache.
Ted Lange from Love Boat, who played Isaac. Michael Dorn, who played Worf on Star Trek. Michael Boatman, who was on Spin City, and Arliss, who's a wonderful guy. They brought out some heavyweights for this one.
Number 17. The puffy shirt will live on in history. In 2004, Jerry Seinfeld donated the infamous shirt to the Smithsonian of American History in Washington, D.C. The puffy shirt episode became a fan favorite after it aired during the 5th season of the show.
There was the low talker, and this was a woman that Kramer was dating.
Jerry agreed to wear one of the shirts she designed on the Today Show. Now, of course, he didn't know that he was agreeing to that because she talked so low that he wouldn't understand anything she was saying. And the shirt ended up being a puffy-looking pirate shirt.
Who knew that the very same puffy pirate shirt would become a historical American icon?
But I don't want to be a pirate.
Number 16. Larry David delivered Newman's first line. Audiences tuned in to see the hilarious exchanges between Seinfeld and Newman, Jerry's nemesis. But before Wayne Knight greeted Jerry, Larry David voiced the then off-screen character.
First time Newman was in the show, you never saw him. It was Newman yelling up from downstairs that he was going to kill himself.
He's threatening to jump out of his apartment window. And you hear Larry David say, I'm gonna jump.
Once there was a big Newman part, you know, you got an actor to play it. Wayne Knight, like, took it to such an incredibly high level.
If you've ever watched the episode in syndication, it's Wayne Knight's voice because they went back and dubbed it in later. I think on the DVD, and of course when it was first run, it was Larry David's voice.
Number 15. Kramer almost looked like a monk. Before the cast of Seinfeld had the chance to yada 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 into our TV hearts for 9 gut-busting seasons, a few famous and surprising faces were considered for the 3 roles of Jerry's pals, Kramer, Elaine, and George.
A lot of people wanted to do the show, but probably the most popular person, Tony Shalhoub, who then became Monk, auditioned for Kramer.
Come on in, but don't touch anything. It seems impossible to imagine Kramer being portrayed by TV's Monk, but he auditioned for the role and was seriously in the running.
The competition for the roles of Jerry Seinfeld's other 2 on-screen BFFs was just as heated.
The Elaine character is really interesting because during the auditions there was Rosie O'Donnell, Patricia Heaton, and Megan Mullally.
Way back in the day, I auditioned for Seinfeld for Jerry and Larry David, but I think it worked out for the best because the way everything ended up going, I'm very happy with.
Julia Louis-Dreyfus's husband, Brad Hall, auditioned for the role of George. So did Danny DeVito, Nathan Lane, a lot of might-have-beens.
As much success as many of the people who appeared on Seinfeld had, you could argue not getting the part for Seinfeld did just as well.
Coming up next.
I didn't know what I was shooting because they wouldn't tell us.
The top secret security measures the show took to keep the finale a secret.
It was kind of like, wearing a scarlet letter.
If that showed up anywhere on any website, I suppose they'd have sued me.
That's next, when 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld returns. Welcome back to 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld. Number 14. Seinfeld wasn't always must-see TV.
People think that Seinfeld was an automatic hit. It wasn't. It took years to discover its audience.
I mean, the show, the first few years, was, a bomb. We couldn't beat Jake and the Fat Man.
I used to be sitting there thinking, God, I hope I'm in show business at this time next year.
We actually didn't even care that we weren't doing that well because we were having such a blast being together. And, after a couple of years went by, we kind of like, isn't it amazing that this show is still a bomb? It really seems good. We all thought it was hilarious. We couldn't believe nobody liked it. And somehow, we got into a better time slot, and then people started liking the show.
I didn't catch up to Seinfeld till later. Most people didn't. It wasn't until season 4 that Seinfeld got good ratings. It wasn't until then that it broke into the top 30 Nielsen's.
Network executives now know if they have a good show in their hands, they got to give it some time.
Number 13. Double dipping was acceptable for guest stars. Seinfeld was known for keeping funny men on file and giving actors multiple shots at different roles.
I had actually guest starred on another episode of Seinfeld where they had shot 2 different endings. It was during the mayoral race in New York between Dinkins and Rudy Giuliani. So they shot me as the press secretary for Dinkins, and they shot another actor as the press secretary for Rudolph Giuliani. And whoever won, that was the character in the show. Well, Giuliani won, so that guy was in the show. When I got the role of Jackie and went to the set, I was familiar with the players.
For guest actors, not getting a role didn't mean their Seinfeld career was over.
I had gone in for the role of a police officer who stopped an argument on the street. And I didn't get that one, and just said, well, okay, fine, there you go. And then maybe a few episodes later in the same season, they called me back. I had absolutely no idea that this particular role would become what it did.
And before she was George's deceased fiancée, this actress read for the Seinfeld pilot.
I auditioned for the character of the waitress, who was the female character in the quartet, the proto-Elaine, I guess.
When an actor would come to audition for a part, and they might not be exactly right for it, but it was so obvious that they were really talented. So we always kept those people in mind.
Number 12. Absolutely no re-gifting allowed for the finale script. Because of the immense amount of interest that the finale generated, producers went to extreme measures to keep the plot of the final episode absolutely secret. Each cast member had to sign off for his or her script and return it at the end of the day.
They had a sign-in list, and they gave you the page that you were on. And on the page was written a number 12. And I had the 12th copy of page 102. And if that showed up anywhere on any website, I suppose they'd have sued me.
I read the script I shot the next morning, and I didn't know what I was shooting because they wouldn't tell us.
And we actually had to sign a document that said we wouldn't even tell our spouses where we were going each day, which would be crazy.
And the Soup Nazi almost blew the cover when his manager leaked to media his involvement in the finale.
I think she got a call from one of the trade magazines, the entertainment magazines, and they asked if I was going to be on the finale, and she told them yes, I was. And immediately the phone rang again, and it was the casting office. They said, oh, by the way, this is going to be a major industry top secret, so don't tell anyone that Larry is going to be part of the finale, and she already blew it. I knew going on the set that I was the one that blew it. It was kind of like, you know, wearing a scarlet letter.
Number 11. Classic lines were happy accidents. With such great writing, little ad-libbing was needed on the show.
You knew if you came up with a line, a good line, that it was going to be done right.
But every now and then, a magic moment of spontaneity would create a classic.
Everything that you put out there, the actors made better. That's better. Yeah, that's good.
I was deathly afraid to ad-lib or mess around, but there was that one line, come back in 1 year, which just didn't flow with the accent I was using, so I dropped in, and I said, come back 1 year, and everybody stopped. It was in a rehearsal, and kind of Jerry looked at Larry, Larry looked at Jerry, they both looked at Andy Ackerman, and everybody kind of went, okay, you know, keep that.
The line is just Jerry, hello. But I operate a lot on instinct, if I can. It's usually the best acting you get, right in the moment, I guess, something happens. And it happened, I said, Jerry, hello! You know, so it just kind of happened. And they, writers liked it the first time they saw it, so every time they came on, my entrance, it was Jerry, hello! Hello, Jerry.
When we return,
I just did a stupid thing. I quit the show.
Larry David reveals one of the biggest mistakes of his TV career.
As I'm walking home, I'm beginning to calculate the amount of money that I just cost myself.
When 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld returns. Welcome back to 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld. Number 10. The show was all buttoned up. With Seinfeld drawing its unique humor from those minute details in life, it came as no surprise when the finale featured a seemingly useless discussion from the pilot episode.
That's what the show was about, little tiny things.
In that very episode, George and Jerry discussed the placement of the second button on a dress shirt and its under-recognized importance to the shirt's fit. In true Seinfeld fashion, the series was tied up with the group having the same conversation while sitting in jail and quickly realizing that we had this conversation before. Number 9. Kramer wasn't only Jerry's neighbor. That's right. Cosmo Kramer was actually based on Kenny Kramer, a struggling comic who lived across the hall from Seinfeld creator Larry David.
Very much like the TV Kramer. He had the frazzled hair. He had the crazy demeanor. He wasn't quite so psychotic.
He was just really out there, but a really great guy. Just fun to have around. And, you know, everything he said would, like, annoy Larry. He was constantly, like, just saying things to pester Larry. We just crack up.
Larry decided to write the character of a wacky next-door neighbor who never went anywhere and always borrowed Larry's food and went in and did his own kind of thing.
A Toyota Wonton. That was my idea, too!
Once Seinfeld, the TV show, took off, Kenny Kramer decided to cash in on it.
Now, this is my own shirt, which I'm very proud of. It's going to be a very popular model. What do you think of that?
The real-life Kramer parlayed his newfound fame into his very own Seinfeld-themed New York City bus tour.
He got in a bus and drove around New York and said, here's where Larry and I did this, and here's where we did that. And he also drove around and talked to people about various Seinfeld locations.
The very first tour we did was in the pouring rain, and when we got up to that restaurant and people got off the bus in pouring rain to have their pictures taken with me, I knew then that it was going to work.
Now, on the show, it's called Monks. In real life, it's called Tom's, and it's owned by a guy named Pete, so go figure. It was at the Regency Theater that Jerry was busted for making out during that romantic epic Schindler's List.
And how complete would any Seinfeld NYC tour be without a stop to sample the mulligatawny made by the real-life and apparently really expensive Soup Nazi?
There's usually about 150 people online. It's usually an hour and a half to an hour 45-minute wait. I pay $11 for an 8-ounce cup of soup. Think I have a racket going, huh?
Number 8. Elaine isn't the only one who can work for J. Peterman.
Elaine had many, many jobs, but one of the most famous jobs was she worked for the J. Peterman catalog. But what a lot of people might not know is that J. Peterman is a real person, there's a real catalog. It just made it famous.
Before he was a dancing star, John O'Hurley kept fans laughing with his tongue-in-cheek portrayal of the over-the-top catalog owner.
Just like the real Peterman, he is this Indiana Jones character canvassing the world for exotic clothes. But on the show, he's Indiana Jones portrayed as a pompous professor type.
The role was perfect for O'Hurley because if you hear him, he's kind of that deep-voiced, over-the-top guy, you know, worldly guy who goes off on these adventures and takes all these weird drugs and, you know, and just hearing John O'Hurley say statements like he's on the yam-yam was just very, very funny.
But what you might not know is that John O'Hurley has never let go of his Peterman persona.
The year after Seinfeld ended, I bought the company with the real J. Peterman. He and I own it together. They went bankrupt, sadly, and I brought him out of bankruptcy, and so we own it together now.
Number 7. George's unemployment was inspired by Saturday Night Live. Sometimes the funniest storylines are based in reality. The hilarious plots and antics on Seinfeld were often plucked straight from the lives of the comedic masterminds behind the witty show.
There was an episode where George works in a real estate office, and then he quits, and then tries to go back the next day, but of course they wouldn't take him back. But that was actually based on a real episode in Larry David's life, because Larry David worked for Saturday Night Live. He was a writer.
They weren't putting my sketches on. One night, 5 minutes before the show was about to air, I walked up to the producer. I said, "That's it, I quit. I can't stand this. I'm done. I'm finished." And as I'm walking home, I'm beginning to calculate the amount of money that I just cost myself. And Kenny Kramer, the character that Kramer's based on, he was there. I said, I just did a stupid thing. I quit the show. He said, "We should go back on Monday morning and pretend the whole thing never happened." So I walked in Monday morning, and that's exactly what I did, and nobody said a word to me.
I think that is one brilliant idea. You know, quitting, going home, saying, "Oh, I made a mistake. Okay, back the next day."
Up next,
Also for you.
find out how the man behind one of Seinfeld's most famous characters reacted to his newfound stardom.
Come back 1 year.
That's next, when 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld returns. Welcome back to 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld. Number 6. Larry David pinch hit for a Yankee.
Larry David played George Steinbrenner for all those episodes where Costanza was working for the Yankees. And he probably did the best George Steinbrenner impression of anybody I've ever seen.
Larry's cranky disposition seemed the perfect fit to be the voice of the prominent businessman and longtime Yankee owner.
We only saw his head, and we could see his arms moving. We never saw his face, but it was Larry David's voice.
Now that we actually have gotten to know Larry David over on his HBO show, it's kind of like not the same thing anymore. I'm always thinking, why is Larry David doing the voice of George Steinbrenner?
They actually had George Steinbrenner play himself in the season finale that season, and they actually cut the scene that George Steinbrenner himself was in. which I think was great because I'd rather hear Larry David do George Steinbrenner any day of the week.
Number 5. It's good to be Jerry's girlfriend.
It is amazing when you think about the dozens and dozens of women who played Jerry Seinfeld's girlfriend on the show. Some of them actually turned out to be some pretty big actresses.
Jerry and Larry David had such a great eye for casting that people then started to pay attention to them. It was such a high-profile launching pad for lots of women.
Deborah Messing graced the hit show as one of Jerry's many love interests in the infamous Yada Yada episode before her fame skyrocketed with Will and Grace. During her first season of Friends, fellow must-see TV star Courtney Cox was also one of Jerry's flavors of the week.
Courtney Cox was a soon-to-be-famous girlfriend of Jerry's. She played a woman who posed as Jerry's wife in order to get a dry cleaning discount. And it led to marital problems, even though they weren't married.
Before she slipped on her stilettos for Sex and the City, Kristen Davis was one of Jerry's more memorable flames.
Jerry, of course, being the absolute clean, neat-free germaphobe that he is, he accidentally dropped her toothbrush in the toilet, and he spent the entire episode not being able to kiss her or do anything.
Starring as Jerry's other half was just a stepping stone for some already well-known actresses.
Marcia Cross and Terry Hatcher were Jerry girlfriends, and then they went on to Desperate Housewives.
Hatcher's stint on the show has definitely gone down in the books for one very memorable line.
She was in the episode where the catchphrase there was, "They're real and they're spectacular." She played a girlfriend of Jerry's who Jerry didn't know whether her boobs were real or not.
Jane Leeves, who went on to do Frasier, was a Jerry girlfriend.
The spunky Brit played a virgin in the classic episode, The Contest.
She came very, very, very close to giving up her flower, shall we say, to Jerry. But then she found out Jerry spilled the beans about the contest. And she goes, "You people are sick."
And somewhere between the Brady Bunch and Zoolander, Christine Taylor was one of Jerry's many ladies.
It's so unbelievable to me that you can literally work like 5 days and appear for maybe, 6 or 7 minutes total in that episode, and more people will recognize me from that than any movie that you work your butt off on.
Number 4. There was no soup for Seinfeld. The Soup Nazi is one of Seinfeld's most famous characters, but the person he was based on wasn't so amused with his portrayal.
No soup for you.
Writer Spike Feresten recalls going to the famous soup stand for lunch with Jerry Seinfeld, and Al, the real-life Soup Nazi, demanded an apology for ruining his life. After an insincere apology from Jerry, Al exclaimed, "No soup for you."
Come back 1 year.
What people might also not know about the actor that played this soup militant is that he didn't even know this character was based on a real person when he auditioned.
It was the sketchiest audition I've ever had. It was the night before. It was already about 7:30 at night. And all they said is the character is called the Soup Nazi and they want you to prepare a Middle Eastern accent. I put Lawrence of Arabia in the VCR and listened to a few phrases from Omar Sharif. And that's where I got the accent from.
Larry's portrayal was such a fan favorite, he decided to take his soup all the way to the Emmys.
I used to have this day job of being a court investigator and a bail bondsman. And a bunch of the clerks kept saying, "You know, you look like the Soup Nazi. Did anyone ever tell you that?" I didn't want to tell them that I was, because then if they made a big deal of it, I wouldn't have been able to get any work done. And I walked out of the court and I thought, God, this is just so popular. I wonder if I could get nominated for an Emmy for that. So I called the TV Academy from a payphone, and they said, yeah, there's a guest actor category. And they said, well, just come down. You have to pay like $100. Peter Boyle won for an episode of X-Files on the dramatic side. And when we went to the dinner afterward, we ended up sitting right next to Mr. and Mrs. Boyle. And he was very nice. He put that Emmy on the table and just said, let's share that tonight. You deserve it. And so it was exciting. No soup for you.
Number 3. Kramer fans had to be silenced.
The whole thing of Kramer bursting in on Jerry was based on the real Kenny Kramer bursting in on Larry David. He would come in, mooch some cereal, leave, acting like he ran the place. The Seinfeld TV show just took that over the top. Kramer's entrances became so popular that the audiences watching the show would go crazy, and it would take up too much time.
Yeah, I got to the point where before the show we'd ask the audience to not applaud when Kramer would come in because it kind of broke the reality of the show.
Very original stuff. So every time he comes through the door, he tries something new. Like, what the hell can he try this time? He didn't try 100 times before.
I always had to wonder, why didn't Jerry Seinfeld lock the door? If you had a kook like Kramer living across the way, wouldn't you lock the door?
When we return,
I was shocked.
Larry David takes on NBC with his most controversial Seinfeld script.
I thought, well, if they don't do this show, I'm going to quit.
When 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld continues. Welcome back to 25 Things You Didn't Know About Seinfeld. Number 2. Yada 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 beat out anti-dentite. The use of the phrase yada 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 exploded after it was introduced in a 1997 episode. The nonsensical words came in handy when a character wanted to gloss over important details.
I remembered it from an editor I had lunch with about 15 years earlier, and I always wanted to do something with it because I remember she kept on saying, and yada, yada, yada. And I never heard anyone else say that.
But what you might not know is that another expression from that same show was expected to resonate with fans.
The funny thing is I never thought that would really catch on like it did because in the same show, I had the concept of the anti-dentite, and I thought, if anything, that was going to kind of like have some legs, but it didn't.
I do use yada, yada, yada. And you did this, and you did that, and thing, and bling, and yada, yada, yada. That's how I talk to people sometimes.
Number 1. No one touched the contest script. The Contest is arguably the most popular episode in the Seinfeld series. It was responsible for introducing the famous euphemism, master of your domain, and involved Jerry and his friends making a sexually charged bet. But as provocative as that sounds, it actually wasn't as controversial as you might think.
Every week we had a blackboard up in the office, and after the read-throughs, NBC, they would come up and see the upcoming shows on the board, and they would ask us what the shows were about. Well, this time I didn't put the show down. I didn't write it on the board because I didn't want them asking me any questions.
A couple of days before the table read for the contest, Larry gave it to me and I read it. I remember saying to him, oh man, I am so depressed. This is too good. And he goes, oh, that's the best answer I could get, that you're totally depressed by how good it is.
Then finally we had the read-through. And I didn't even look at the reactions from NBC, but we got huge laughs at the read-through. And I thought, as this thing is going on, well, if they don't do this show, I'm going to quit. I'm just going to quit if they won't do it.
Usually, either Castle Rock, the production company, or the network would give some notes. I think that was the first time that when I was on the show, that nobody had any notes.
Said nothing. I was shocked.
It was really a credit to Larry that he was able to pull it off with such finesse and, you know, not even use the word or anything like that.
That wraps up 25 Things You Didn't Know About. For more on the cast, check out tvguide.com.